Okay, so here we are.
Okay, so again, to start with, thank you so much for taking out time, and it's pleasure to have it. Thanks for taking, this topic up, which is very good actually. This is something every organization to need to learn about it, right? About the foundation of business literacy for data management and governance. So normally not a lot of people talk about it. So why not you take 30 seconds to introduce yourself, because this is our first one-to-one session, maybe for new audiences who will end up looking at it. By the way, I got 1,000 subscribers. Yay. So audiences are coming in. Yes, please, Mark.
Okay. Well, Mustafa, thank you for inviting me to join for this conversation with you today. So it's a pleasure to be here. Okay, a little bit about myself. So my name is Mark Atkins. I run a small company called Introverse. I've been in I guess, kind of the data management, data warehousing space forever. But my focus now is very niche. I focus on business metadata, and specifically what I'm focused on is language and capture of business knowledge through information artifacts. So my partner and I have developed a means of a process by which we write very clear definitions, but that process also engages the business community and gets them on board, gets ownership of the definitions, and starts to elicit information from within the group, and we can capture that and develop, if you like, the business side of that IT business divide.
Yeah. So again, this is one of the topic I was waiting for it, because this since this Gen AI come into picture, and all this unstructured piece, and now people are talking about structure piece as well in LLM, which I still don't agree, but people
Mm-hmm.
want that. But unstructured, for me, unstructured is something we really need to focus on and try to get out as many as use cases as. And to go into unstructured piece, right? All these business metadata and technical is a given thing. For me, business metadata is key, and how to extract it from the unstructured piece is key. So as we discussed, we have all these questionnaires with us. Let's start with this basic question which we have, that how can you help us to explain the business literacy as a foundation for data management and governance with respect to unstructured piece, and which is the core of our session today. Yeah.
Sure, sure. Look, first let me say that for the purpose of this discussion, unstructured data, which I prefer to describe as free format information,
Hmm.
is 90% of an organization's data. It's in information that is encapsulated in reports, policies, procedures, requirements, and specifications, and so on. But I also include other information in that, such as those information that's extracted from databases, especially into spreadsheets and dashboards. And I call all of these types of unstructured data information artifacts.
Mhm.
So the trend for data management and governance is from the atomic data side. That's where the trend has traditionally been, using data catalogs and technical metadata discovery, and then trying to classify that data to business concepts. It's a bottom-up approach.
Hmm.
What my business partner Terry and I have been doing successfully is approaching the problem from the opposite side. So top down from the information needs, and
Hmm.
at the same time using that process to capture organizational knowledge, which has intrinsic value in itself. I guess I kind of started this journey. I was lucky enough, or maybe unlucky enough, to be a chief data architect in a very large telco, and started that. That was kind of the kickstart for me to really get to the unstructured side of things as well as the data side.
Mhm. Yeah, so as you mentioned, right? So see these two key areas, which is data management and data governance, right? People people normally look these two as the same thing. They're saying
Hmm.
you're managing something and you're governing something is same thing. So can you put some light onto it that how these two differentiate and how this uh this your piece, as you mentioned, right, come into picture?
Well, that's a very good point, and governance really is about setting policies and setting accountabilities and so on, and making sure that that happens. But what I see in a lot of IT governance is it becomes nothing more than a book on a shelf and one person who's kind of championing this within the organization, but nothing is getting measured, nothing is getting actually done. So this is what I would call governance management, is where you're actually managing and measuring the effect of the governance on the organization. And I think that's where, so we've got data management, which is, the day-to-day processes around what do you do with data of all kinds, and how do you look after the life cycle of the data and the security and all of that kind of thing. The governance is around setting those policies and processes up and establishing the accountabilities. But what we need is governance management, which is then, okay, measuring whether the governance is being successful, whether the governance is being done or not.
And that if we go towards federated lakehouse concept, right, that is where it becomes super important, right? We are
Yeah.
at the moment we are struggling with single lakehouse. Now, if you go toward the federated lakehouse, how you want to govern it, right? As you mentioned, a very important point here is it has to come from top down approach. It cannot be bottom up approach. So, can you give some background and details on this piece?
Well, sure. So Terry and I, my business partner Terry and I, successful track record in data warehousing. Terry since the late 1980s, and me since the mid 1990s through to the mid 2000s.
Mhm.
And this all started as a data warehouse methodology that Terry designed in the late 1980s for her employer back then in a US insurance company.
Mhm.
And it was compatible with the Inmon approach on having a centralized and integrated data warehouse. But our methodology included performing an analysis of all the relevant business processes and data flows, and then designing the data model from that knowledge. And it was only after doing the design that a proof of concept physical implementation was conducted. Luckily, Teradata won that platform deal in 1988.
Mhm.
So when I first moved to the USA and I ended up working at a company in the USA, I first worked with Terry in 1998, back then, shortly after she joined Teradata. So I was working as a contractor in Teradata and she joined Teradata. And Teradata were using a cut down methodology that involved creating a data warehouse logical data model as a business logical model through the knowledge discovery workshops
Mhm.
attended by a cross section of the business community. And this is essentially what Terry had been doing in her insurance company before she joined Teradata. So
Mhm.
this logical model was then the basis for the data discovery and developing the data transformation rules and the physical data model. So that whole working with the business first was a top-down approach. But the downside of that for Teradata was you were employing a data modeler or a couple of data modelers and working for 6 months before you could actually implement any technology. And they didn't like that. They wanted to sell boxes and they wanted to sell boxes fast. So this is where the beginning of the demise of the data modeling started. And the industry models came along. But what that did was short circuit the process of working with the business community and getting them on board. So that's essentially where it all started and how we've developed it from there.
Yeah, so that you're talking about structured data, right? Now you want to do the same thing for unstructured data, right?
Yes.
So before we go into this data literacy versus business literacy, that's also very key. I want to focus on that piece as well because business thinks, normal people think understanding business is equal to understanding is data, is two different things. So we'll go into it. But as you excited me when you mentioned that you want to do top to down in unstructured piece as well. So so can you put some light on it, like how normally you do it? Because people think you go and talk to someone, or you pick up the data and you pick up the metadata. From that metadata you make sense and you create a business rule. You profile a column, you do a distinct and group by, you take out and that's what your business data is. So yeah, on unstructured piece, how you actually do it?
So if you think about what I'm calling information artifacts, they are discourse on business terminology, typically. They're discourse on terminology. But
Hmm.
unless we understand the terminology that we're using to put into those documents, spreadsheets, reports, dashboards, unless we've got those definitions first and we understand the knowledge of the business, then we can start to understand and curate that unstructured data and understand whether it fits with that view of the world that we've uncovered by talking with the business community. So in other words, we're starting by collecting knowledge, business terms and definitions.
Mhm.
And beyond that, we're also starting to understand how the business works from the minds of the business, but also aligning that understanding across the organization. And we do this through workshops, and it's always surprising how often we have people from different areas of the organization who think that the business is working a particular process in different ways, but it's not. We're aligning the process as well, or the understanding of the process. So once we've got that, we can start to curate information artifacts by, as well as categorizing them for the standard things, so sensitivity and security and so on. We can also say, hey, this particular document, let's take, for example, I'll take two examples. I'll take a requirement specification and I'll take a bit of SQL code, just as two examples. So my requirement specification, the business analyst is going to, first of all, is going to write the requirements down, and she's going to use whatever language she's familiar with. Ideally, what we need is to get that language aligned first. So if she can go to a central glossary that has clear definitions, take those definitions, understand them, and then write the context of the document against those definitions, then she's going to be making a much clearer requirement specification to the technical builders. Now, on the other hand, on a piece of SQL, someone's going to build a query or something to facilitate that a particular business term into a dashboard, for example, might be student or equivalent full-time student load or some metric. But once that piece of code is written and we're sure that it aligns with the business concept, then we can catalog that. But it is essentially unstructured data, a piece of SQL code. I know it's structured, but it's semi-structured. And the documentation that goes around it and the comments and so on that are within it can be written in a way that aligns very closely to the business terminology. We can then capture that and record that artifact so that we can encourage reuse. So we've got a top down by defining the language of the business first, and then we're building the unstructured data to, if you like, in some ways, be that interface between the business language and the technical data.
As I
You
have,
understand what I mean?
yeah, I'm coming into it actually. So me being me and an essay and data essay, I will try to dig in further with your permission, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So what we are saying here is you go to the business, you collect the data. Do you use any tool to inject that data into it so it can make sense and create automatic relationships? My first question, I will come to the next one, but let's start with this one. You gather information from the workshops. You have a pre-built templates or you have a tool where you inject this?
We capture that in. We do have a platform that we capture that in.
Mhm.
It allows us to capture essentially the documentation from the workshop. So we always take minutes of the conversation so that we have something concrete to go back to say why particular decisions were made during that workshop. So we have that as knowledge artifact.
Mhm.
As part of the definition workshops, we have a structured definition approach, which asks specific questions and gets us to the real nitty-gritty of what the business term really means within the organization. And if there are conflicts, we can understand those conflicts and we can resolve those conflicts.
Mhm.
Those definitions then also go into the glossary component of our platform in a structured format.
Mhm.
And then when we start to find the artifacts that relate to those business terms, then we can catalog those as well. And we establish through that process, we establish the accountabilities and the responsibilities for the curation of the artifacts, the frequency of the review process. There's a whole governance framework that's put
Yeah.
around that to start with.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then the community can continue to
Hmm.
question or discuss within the platform specifics around the definitions, the rules, or the artifacts.
Okay. So this is getting exciting for me actually. So what you do it from workshops, you dig out business definitions against the keywords or any or whatever values are there. And then you go, so can I say that actually that is where Gen AI can become more important for you? Because once
Yeah.
you throw data, your unstructured data into Gen AI, then you can ask LLM to dig out NER for you. It can dig out the nouns for you. It can dig out the key values for you. It can dig out everything. And correct me if I'm wrong, then you can map that with your definitions which you have taken from business and combine. Is that my understanding correct?
Look, I think in theory, yes, you could do that. I think the important thing is having that RAG reference augmented side of things to be looking at the definitions that you've got or the terminology that you've got to make sure that you're bringing out from your unstructured data, you're bringing out things that really are within the same context, discussing within the same context.
Correct. From the content itself. Right now, you what you have done it, you have done the definitions. You say, hey, employee or a person mean this from this different definition. A person can be a customer, person can be an employee, person can be an XYZ.
Yeah.
This definition, you have picked it up. Now you go to content, unstructured content himself, and you say, find person for me. Gen AI will find person for you, right? Now you map
Yeah.
both. And will that work or not? Because these use cases are
Uh,
there with me
Look,
right
and
now.
the short answer is no, although
Yeah.
a lot of the world is saying yes. And the reason being it's a no is that
Okay.
unstructured document, if you remember that, data is predominantly historical, but it's also been written, um, over time, the organization has changed, the language has changed. People come in and use a different language. So I'll give you an example.
Good point. It's a good point.
So it,
Yeah.
and I work a lot in the university sector. So there are two basic core core terms in the university, which is your course and your unit of study. Okay, so the course is the overall thing that you are studying for, and the units of study are the things that sit within that course. If you go to the USA, or if your university is using a US system, then they're talking about programs and courses. And the program relates to the course, and the unit of study relates to the
I got it.
course of study. So you're using two terms that mean completely different things, but you're using the same term, and potentially you've got documentation like this. And that's just a simple example. There are lots of other examples where, particularly around abbreviations, for example, documents are full of abbreviations quite often. An abbreviation can mean many things depending on the context. So unless the LLM is trained enough to understand the context of the document that it's reading, and it should be able to work that out. Well, I mean, it doesn't. I mean, it's all about it's all tags. You know, it's all about.
You made it very interesting. I can tell you. I can bring more into it, which I am. You are absolutely right. Right? You have nailed it down actually. That PK can be something else and PK can be something else. Both PKs are sitting in the content. Now, when you search, your query does not know which PK you are talking about, right?
Yep.
So for that knowledge you have to bring from somewhere else, which is what you are doing right now. But actually, you open another Pandora box. It's very exciting, actually.
This is something we discovered a long time before LLMs came along. So two of the major glossary technology companies, I won't mention their names, but you know, part of the big sexy appeal of them was that you could plug it in and you could open a document on your desktop, and the business loved it because they could then highlight on a word and it would tell them the definition of the word. But it had no idea of the context of the document, so it could be actually misleading the reader. You know, Wiki is very, very structured, and wikis are you know, they're curated so that those kinds of issues don't occur. But the documents in an organization are, quite frankly, are a mess.
Absolutely. Actually, you are making one of my theory correct, actually, because in LLM, people think you throw data into LLM, especially it's not going to work like this, right? That is where vectorization come into picture. And we say vectorization make data more accurate. Now, people don't understand what this accuracy means. Right now, what they think is you have a vector has billions of dimensions, you throw structured data into it. Of course, that structured data need to convert into a vector using the embedding models. Now, that is where the beauty comes in. People think you can use any embedding model. It will convert into a digit, distribute into a n number of, or as many number of dimensions are there in the vector. I think bare minimum right now is 7 billion, and up to 70 billion, and people are working on 440 billion dimensions as well in vectors, right? So the other day I was in a conversation with someone. They were saying, hey, you can use any generic embedding model, it will convert. I say no, because I'm not a guru of vector as of now, nor I am a data scientist, but it does not make sense to me. When you're embedding something, you need to understand where the data is coming from, which domain, from which business is it coming, and your embedding model has to be specific to that business function. So it should convert relevant. So when Mustafa is here, coming from a data, you have an insurance embedding model, just for the discussion sake. So it will convert me as an insurer. But if I'm a bank account holder, there has to be a separate embedding model. So that same data should go into that embedding model. Now it will call me an account manager or account holder. So that discussion was happening. They're saying, no. But you actually proved that. You just mentioned that. Yeah, that's true. Because unstructured can have different kind of languages. One can call one thing as one thing and second thing same as one thing. So that differentiator has to be there. It's actually, you have solved one of our biggest problem. So what we are saying here is, it's not about only structured data will not make sense once you convert structure into unstructured. Actually, just to highlight you, right, the use cases right now is happening. They're saying you throw unstructured into LLM can make sense for it. But why don't you throw structured data into it? And LLM should make sense. So my fight with them is it won't, because structured data does not have a relationships. There's an employee ID, there's an employee name. When it is sitting into a row, it makes sense. But when it goes into a become a text, it will not make sense unless someone will say, hey, the employee ID and employee name have a relationship. So that's my one of the argument going with a lot of data folks around the globe, right? And we are in the middle of a conversation whether throwing structured data into LLM will work or not. My stand is no. But you are also proving that until unless you don't have this manually or maybe semi-automated way of defining this metadata, it won't work actually, right?
Right, right.
Sorry, I've taken more than expected time, but this is the pain area which I've been discussing with a lot of people, and people are not agreeing. Thanks for raising that. So this brings us to the next one, right? Which is data literacy and business literacy in your top-down approach. I think it's a good time. The conversation has heated up, right? It's gone into the right direction, actually. Can you
Okay.
put some light into this data literacy versus business literacy?
Sure. What we found from our experience back in 1998, Terry and me, but also through analyses of other projects since, and that's not just data warehouse and BI, but billing systems and ERP system implementations, is that the success or failure of any project was down to two things, basically, and things that are closely related. One, the level of detail in the definitions, and secondly, the level of engagement of the business community. In other words, establishing business literacy with the stakeholder community within the stakeholder community. But in recent years, there's been a lot of buzz, on establishing data literacy. That's right. There's lots of education companies and so on doing data literacy. However, I think this is doing this without a clear understanding of the business environment is flawed. It doesn't work. Sure, I think it's important to get a better understanding of data management into the business community, but business folks and IT folks, the IT folks being traditionally expected to provide the data management skills and processes, they enter their different professions because they have different drivers and different capabilities. Okay. And while business schools typically include a certain amount of technology-related study as part of their courses, many, if not most, IT courses do not include any business management. So we're already at a divide. And what we need to do to bridge the gap is a better understanding and clarity over the business needs and drivers and what data is needed to fulfill these. We talked earlier about the process of, how the workshopping process and everything that we do. But the one thing I didn't mention then is we always work against some key issue that's causing it. So a business issue is always the driver because we're not trying to boil the ocean. We're working piece by piece on what's most important at the time. But it's with the data literacy camp, it's almost as if they assume that through a bit of education for the business community, that they'll rise to the challenge of telling the infotech folk how the data reflects the business context, including the challenge of deciphering all the issues introduced as technical debt. But the business community mostly just don't have the bandwidth, the support, or the interest in doing that. Remember that most structured data are historical and stripped of context. And ignoring data quality issues, that data can only be used in a business context if we, one, have a clear and agreed understanding of the definitions of the business concept in question, and two, have some certainty that the system that captured that data was based on the same definitions.
Correct. Actually, you have brought up one more very, very key point in your discussion, right? That it has to start from a business issue. There's no doubt about it. It has to start from some business pain point. But at the same time, my stand into this one, okay, let's talk about lakehouse, right? Centralized lakehouse. Right now, we have a centralized lakehouse concept, and now people are going towards federated lakehouse, right? So what my stand is, don't come out of lakehouse into centralized lakehouse into a federated lakehouse because of the challenges in centralized. Because if you focus on the challenges, you will come into a federated lakehouse solving those challenges only. You need to have those challenges, but your federated lakehouse should come from an enterprise strategy. It
Yeah.
cannot be a strategy to fix something. It need to start with the pain area, but it need to be a global top down manner. It cannot be a bottom up, because if you bring issue and you fulfill this bottom up approach, end of the day you'll find more issues is life, right? Challenges will come. So
Mm.
you have to come from top to bottom. What is your business strategy to bring this federated lake house? Not because if there are a couple of a few issues in centralized lake house and you build that. So that I think that understanding also matches with your definition of this thing. Okay, now next one, right? Actually, you have brought another thing very important. If you say business literacy is so much important, are we saying that all data professionals, all those coders sitting over there need to understand business? Because if they don't, they will end up struggling in unstructured world, because structure is quite safe, right? Because you know where data is coming from, who entered that data in OLTP, where how it is pipelining. But unstructured world is quite different. So are you saying it's a key to have a business literacy in unstructured world for data professionals?
So that yes, the data professional should have some more business understanding. But again, the focus must be on building the efficiencies by building business capability and accountability on the business side. So I
Hmm.
still think the emphasis is on the business side, and so it's more important that the business community get their ducks in a row, because I mean, quite frankly, there's a lot of confusion even within the business community, because they've we're working in multicultural, multi-generational workforces where people have, you know, they move every 18 months. You're in a new job. The CEO moves, the strategy changes, we're in this organizational turmoil all the time. So we need to get the business community to get their ducks in a row by agreeing and capturing concise and unambiguous definitions of their terminology, especially the concepts around the core business and emerging needs. Look, as I said, organizations are continually changing, and the language and knowledge of the organization is therefore also changing. So we need business as usual capability in the business community to manage knowledge capture, assign accountability and responsibility, and stay on top of the business evolution. How can we expect our IT and data professionals to understand the business if the message from the business are ambiguous, or worse, just misleading?
Yeah.
So how many times does a business analyst unknowingly in a requirements doc to redefine a business term that was defined in a previous and unrelated requirements document? If we have the management processes to produce clear, unambiguous definitions that are agreed and readily available from a single source of truth, we can have efficiencies of reuse. A quote from Deborah Amidon's Innovation Daily, which I came across fairly recently, says, "We need to manage the innovation environment, not leave it to serendipity. Managing is a function of creating the conditions where innovation can occur, where ideas flow efficiently into and within the system and are converted into viable products and services that create value." And I think that's the crucial thing, is unless we have stability and understanding, through management of the environment and the knowledge management, we can't, unless we have that, we won't get innovation. So innovation is a product of good management.
Yeah, actually, you are absolutely right, because I will put myself on spot actually. I was the culprit of saying that, because I come from a structured world, right? I was the culprit, like always, no need to understand business, because that is where my value add comes, because I've worked in banking, I've worked in telco, I've worked in Department of Corrections. I've created data marts and data warehouses for sales organizations. Now I was in a bank, now I'm in an oil and gas company, right? So business knowledge was never been important for me. because my basics of data modeling was very clear. I can read a data model and I can understand the business. And I need to write the pipelines, I need to create reporting, not a problem. But now, the moment I jump into an unstructured world, that is where I start struggling myself, because unstructured world does not have data model. It does not have relationships given over there. You can read 5 lines in one paragraph and next page, next document will explain something different. Until unless you don't understand the business, you can't produce relevant and valued information from, even if you use a chat GPT LLM, you won't understand, right? Although it is sending it out for you, if you don't understand, you can't guarantee whatever LLM is throwing out is correct or wrong. Even chat GPT does not tell you that, right? So this brings, we have just a time check, we're already 40 minutes there, so I still have your 10-15 minutes, but the discussion is very, Mark, very non-stop, actually, I can tell you, because this is a key thing everybody is doing. And as I mentioned, unstructured use cases in Gen AI is success there. For structure is not success. But when we are defining the success of unstructured data in Gen AI, for me, it's also a question mark. And you are proving that blindly you cannot dig in. So the moment people start investing more into this LLM and try to make decisions, automated decisions, that is where I think they will come to know how this information architects are important. And that is what my next question is. Can you elaborate a little bit more on information artifacts, how you break it down? As I think I already asked this question, but let's repeat it out. Like the categories and all those templates, you bring it, or you first do your homework. For example, if you go to a banking sector, you do your homework and bring relevant question, and telco is a different sets. How this information artifacts you're talking about?
Well, to start with, as you said, before we get into it at all, we always do our homework. We always do a lot of analysis of the industry as a whole and the client specifically. And you said something about, unstructured data doesn't really have a data model. Well, it kind of does, because if you the natural language model of the definitions, and this is why we've broken our definition approach into a structured language, so that we have what are called we call them business rules. They're basically lines of the definition, very short sentences that create a relationship between all the different business terms. So you're always defining a business term using other business terms in the definition. So you're actually building a language model of the company. And essentially, as long as the artifacts are aligned to that, which is the curation process, in other
Correct.
words, when I'm talking about, if I'm writing something about students applying and how they must apply for a course, then I have to use the terminology that provides the business rule, the business context. There's also business rules. There's a business rules side of things. SVBR, which is the business rules side of things, which is how you would write your process rules. I'm not going to talk about that, but in terms of going back to the information artifacts, I've said it before, 90% of an organization's data are represented as information artifacts. Generative AI is going to increase this volume dramatically, because people are
Yes.
going to start producing more and more content. Finding existing artifacts at the moment is becoming increasingly difficult. There are so many places to look. It's like a treasure hunt. And if you can't find what you're looking for, human nature is to create a new one from scratch. So we get duplication. We also get conflicting versions in our Teams, SharePoint, intranet, and whatever other knowledge management stores that are being used. As I said earlier, the language and knowledge of an organization is forever changing. To get control of this requires those same business as usual capabilities to manage that knowledge Language is just the first step. So we need those same processes around the unstructured data, around the information artifacts. So with the establishment of business literacy management, we can use the business terminology for categorizing information artifacts. The central glossary then becomes a means of describing the context of information artifacts, but only if those same business as usual capabilities expand to encompass the information artifacts. It's a curation process to capture, assign accountability and responsibility, and manage the life cycle of every single, well, it doesn't have to be every single artifact, but the artifacts that are crucial to the running of the organization: policies, procedures, regular reports, dashboards, things like that. Then we can start to see the reuse as well. But we also need to measure that reuse. And this is crucial because what gets measured gets done. And we need to measure that reuse in order to calculate its value and report it through to the governance executives. At the moment, it's seen as, well, it's intangible. The value is intangible of doing this, but the benefits are there to be made. It's just finding the right people to champion this.
Just for the audience, right? When I say there is no model into the structure, you correctly mentioned models are there. What I meant was it's not easy to find out as compared to structure world. So you're bringing this here outside knowledge, which is information artifacts from the workshops, and you bring it and map it in the unstructured world. What I meant was if you give me a data model of structured, I will take 3 hours and understand the whole business.
Right.
But if you give me an unstructured thing, if I don't understand the business, I can't make it out. Because every person, every department has a different language. That's what I meant. So that's what I'm saying. The thing which you are doing is become so critical to dig out the actual model from the unstructured that it has to match at, and else it will not make sense. Okay, so that brings to our one of the last question, but that is one of the key questions. Like it will be a very hard journey, right? to bring up this business literacy across the organizations, right? And there must be some resistance you have seen in organizations because we are still struggling for data culture change in structured world. Now suddenly we have jumped into unstructured world. So share us with your experiences of resistances you're getting in organizations to cope up this thing.
Oh yeah, definitely, absolutely. There's resistance, but it is, as you said, it's the same resistance that's being experienced by the data governance teams that are doing the bottom-up approach. The biggest gripe I hear from the infotech side is the difficulty in getting business engagement, and the reasons the business community won't engage are: one, they're already spread thin due to cost cutting; two, they're not given the right performance metrics; and three, the demands on them to adopt major IT system replacements gets in the way of, it's putting the cart before the horse always. Excuse me. And the irony about system consolidation, if I get onto that topic, system replacement, is that by not getting the business definitions agreed first, the result is chaos from broken business processes and data migration issues that cost the organization dearly. If only they spend a bit of time, go slow a little bit, get the ducks in the row first, these projects would go so much more smoothly. But the C-suite don't stick around long enough to see the mess. They're there, they've claimed their changes, and they leave and move to the next one. So
how long
there is
last?
Yeah, there is movement and influence, from the ranks. We've recently been researching the loss of time experienced by knowledge workers trying to find the information they need. And it's an eye-opener, I'll tell you. It's estimated that the cost to an organization here in Australia is more than $5,000 per year for each knowledge worker, trying to find the information. That's time wasted. Now, if they had a repository, a knowledge base that they could draw from and trust, that would be a huge saving. For a medium to large organization, that's millions. Now, we recently did an ROI calculation for a client, and it calculated a break-even point of 7 months with an
Wow.
increasing gain from that point.
Wow.
But the value is intangible. So, the organization says, I don't quite get that, but here's this new system that I'm putting in. I'm going to put my money in that direction. Here's another quote from Deborah Amidon's Innovation Daily. Measurement of intangible value, perhaps an oxymoron, is the least understood and at the same time the most crucial activity for success. And I think she hit the nail on the head there in that um, business business management need to wake up to the fact that there are better ways of managing the information that sits within the interior within their unstructured data. There's one quote. We had an interview with a CFO in a large university, and my first question to her was, what keeps you awake at night? What troubles you? And her answer was, we've got all these artifacts, these data sets, and there's unstructured data all over the place. Nobody knows where it is. And it's a huge risk to the organization because, it could be lost. It could be, given away accidentally. There could be something critical that we lose because we don't know where it is. We went through a series of questions. My last question was, where do you think the biggest opportunity is for you? And her answer was, well, we've got all this unstructured data and data sets and everything everywhere. Exactly the same problem. If only we could utilize that. And I think that summarizes quite nicely the landscape that we're dealing with, but the difficulty of actually, getting through those barriers.
Yeah, actually, that brings back my post. I put it few days back, I think last week on LinkedIn, that is data the future or the metadata is the future? You must have gone through that, right?
I
I,
did.
yeah. So I think so. I will ask this question to you. I've asked this to Howard last week. I had Howard Diesel from South Africa. I had a chance to had a session with him. I asked him that one as well. I'll ask you as well. Will metadata be the future of data? Because yeah, we know data and metadata is also a data,
Right.
but what I personally think is as data is becoming so huge, so humongous actually, and all those dark data, not dark structured data, dark unstructured data, which is sitting actually hundreds of millions of files. They're going to scan it, they're going to throw it into cognitive search, cognitive services, and convert into a text. All those data is coming, right? Now, once that data is here, I personally feel it won't be possible to process it. It's just
No.
my personal point of view. I
Mhm.
think the metadata will become so crucial that you have to define each and every file. It has to be for example, we create a PowerPoint, right? And we have 100 slides into it. Is good to define the description outside the PowerPoint or rather than extract information inside the PowerPoint, right? So for me,
Right. There's
metadata. So what do you say about that?
metadata. You've got to have those. You've got to have not just what the knowledge systems call tags. I mean, tags are everywhere. Tags are useful, but you also need very structured approach to the metadata that you keep. So it comes
Yeah.
back to structuring the metadata to manage the unstructured world. There's things like, just for example, if I have a central glossary, why do I need to? I shouldn't have to create an internal document glossary for each document. I should be able to farm that point, reuse that, track the reuse, measure the reuse, categorize the document, but in business terms, using the terminology that describes the context of the document. And yeah, metadata is the only way forward. I've seen plenty of attempts to apply the sort of the Google search internally, but you pull back so much. You don't know where to start. You don't know what to trust. As I said, it's a treasure hunt. You can find documents that are misleading. You can find old documents that are discussing the business process as it was 5 years ago. You can, and be misled about all kinds of things.
Yeah, because there has been events. So document sitting there, now COVID comes, after COVID, everything changes.
Yeah.
So who will tell the LLM and machine learning that, hey, you don't need to consider that piece and you have to consider post speed? It won't know. Okay, we have a time check of 5 minutes only. Question I'm also asking few people. Now this Gen AI, which is we say we automate things, right? This is an AI. A lot of people are coming, they're saying, let's implement Gen AI solution, which is slash LLM, and via chat, you find everything and you save the manpower. You have 10 resources, you reduce to 1 or 2 resources. You save manpower. I'm against that, just to put it up front. I'm against that. I feel those 10 people still need to be there. You bring in this LLM and Gen AI and do the work of 200 people. That should be the approach to implement this AI rather than saving cost of those 8 people out of 10. What's your take on this one?
My take on it is Gen AI is just another tool. And tools have always needed the human to use the tool. So I don't think that it should be seen as a means of further cost cutting in organizations. And because the danger of doing that is you're removing the innovation and the people that are generating knowledge. You're taking them away from the organization. You'll have nothing left to put into your LLM. But also by getting to a point where you're competing by reducing your cost, you're also actually impacting the value generating parts of your business, so that your business is actually going to struggle to compete, because you're competing on a cost perspective, not a value perspective. And we need to be looking at it as adding value and using it to add value where it can add value, not to cut costs.
Thank you so much for that feedback, because that is what my standing is as well. Again, thank you so much, Mark. We are on dot, and pleasure to have you again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. It's I love talking about this stuff. So go well, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you so much. A pleasure to have you. Take care.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye bye.
Bye bye.